As we head into 2020, let's take a look at Pakistan and India and the relationship there. I often bring you the news from India, and I'm pleased to say that Rani Singh, who often brings us the news from Pakistan, is with us in the studio. Hello there, Rani.
Hi, Rahul.
How are you?
I'm okay.
Very good. It was a difficult year, I think, when you look at the relations between India and Pakistan. And I think it's fair to say, since independence between those two countries, it's always been difficult. But they stood on the brink of war this year, and it was only avoided really at the last minute.
It was indeed. Both of these countries, as you say, have had tense relations, and that line of control, the boundary that goes between the two countries, which divides Kashmir, is a real bone of contention. It was unfinished business left by the British in 1947, and it really has been used as a beating stick for one country or the other, and things became very tense. And of course it matters for not just Britain but the rest of the world, because both these countries are nuclear armed. India is one of the biggest economies, one of the biggest markets for Britain. So the world watches very carefully, and relations between the two countries and the rest of the world, of course, swing this way and that.
Yeah, very much so. You mentioned their unfinished business, Kashmir. Is it possible to finish it? Is it possible for there to be a resolution on this particular issue? Because India doesn't want any external involvement in trying to resolve it. Pakistan clearly does.
India has always said that, and that's why everybody else around the world has been told to butt out. But India has found a solution for itself. It considers, as you know, because we both reported on it earlier this year in August, that cataclysmic event when India grabbed autonomy back from Kashmir had autonomous status.
It withdrew the Article 370, which gave that state great autonomy within the Indian constitution, and basically ended that. And that was a very interesting time, and because it came after the tensions between India and Pakistan, and it looked once again that both countries could well be heading towards some sort of conflict there. But whilst that was happening, I was in India during the course of that. It was a move that was incredibly popular with the Indian people.
Many Indian people, but there were others, some intellectuals and activists who really objected to that and spoke for the Kashmiris. You know, we don't talk much about the Kashmiri people. We talk about India, we talk about Pakistan, but there is it was a state, an independent state, pretty much, and just like the other, 29 states of India, it has a culture, an identity, and there are
a very specific one.
Yeah, these Kashmiri people who belong to the mountains and feel very possessive about their own country, and
it's a very interesting point that you raised that, and I think it is an important part of the discussion, isn't it? That is overlooked, because if you go to Kashmir, whether you go on the Indian side or whether you go on the Pakistani side, and I've been on both, and you speak to many Kashmiris, they will tell you now that they're fed up with both countries, that actually they would prefer their own independence. The difficulty is when you're between these two nuclear powers, that's unlikely.
It is unlikely, and many of them just say, and you and I both the same that way. We've covered Kashmir from both sides, and I did it for 5 Live here years ago. And they say we just want our independence. We want freedom. There's this word azadi, freedom, which you hear, and it's quite tragic because the conflict has been going on for so long. You find children who know this word and who've known nothing but bloodshed and conflict and
in one
guns.
of the most beautiful parts of the world that you could ever imagine visiting. I mean, it's something like a picture postcard that actually the lives of people are as far removed from that as you could possibly imagine.
Indeed. I mean, when there have been peaceful times, brief peaceful times, it's been used as a film location for Indian movies. And it's supposed to be this romantic backdrop. Indeed, I had my own honeymoon there, and it is. And Kashmiris have said to me, our place is so beautiful, that's why everybody wants it. But of course, it's the positioning of it, the geopolitical positioning of it, that India and Pakistan prize so dearly. But India made this move. It not only removed the autonomous status of Kashmir, it divided it into two states, which came under the government's direct control instead of having its own government. And in that one move, it's sort of dealt a blow to the hopes of the Kashmiris and anybody who supported them. And
interesting, if you look at what's happened there, there's been a release for the first time today of a couple of the political leaders, but not the major political leaders. But, if you look at people like the Abdullahs, Mahbooba Mufti and other senior Kashmiri leaders have all been held in detention. The internet is still cut off in Indian administered Kashmir. So as we head towards the end of the year, the resolution that India hoped it was going to get to that problem, it hasn't really resolved that much at all in terms of the way that the people who live there feel.
Yes, you say that. You're talking about the chief ministers, of course, and people who've been chief ministers, all the top political leaders from different parties. But, this is the way India deals with stuff, Rahul, isn't it? And not just India, but other countries as well. Stop the internet, stop the media talking, don't allow foreigners in, don't allow journalists in, don't allow politicians in. And so the voice of the people, the Kashmiri people, is stifled completely. I've been into prisons there, into central jail, and I've been into torture chambers and other places. And this is the way regimes deal with it, this kind of thing. And in one sense, it's effective because who's fighting them? Who's fighting India? Who can stand up to India?
Let's have a look at the two leaders now. Here we have, two men who in their own ways are extremely charismatic in their own countries. Prime Minister Modi won a sizable victory at the ballot in India this year. And of course, across the border now is the cricketer turned politician Imran Khan. Their own personal relationship is not very strong by the looks of it. And as we move towards 2020, is there any chance of that relationship improving?
It doesn't look like it at the moment. In fact, I would say things are quite bad, aren't they? Missile launchers have actually been moved up to the line of control by India. And there's been statements in the Pakistani press just recently with the Pakistani foreign minister saying that he's going to write a letter to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OCI, talking about the recent events in India, the violation of human rights. And look at the language. They don't call it, as journalists, we say Indian-held Kashmir, but they say occupied Kashmir.
Both sides use that term.
Yeah.
India, if you put on Indian television, it'll be Pakistan occupied Kashmir. I mean, the terminology that both use show that it's so important to the identities of both countries that since 1947, it's almost shaped the identities of both countries. It's something they're unwilling to give up.
It has. And it is particularly interesting, the language that's used. It's kind of a weapon of war in a way. It affirms your identity. And you're talking about the relationship between the two leaders. I would say it's not good at all. There have been times in the past when India and Pakistan's leaders have extended a hand of friendship towards each other. But at the moment, with what India is doing, Pakistan has cause to complain. But also there's a deeper reason.
You're right there, but the difficulty that Pakistan faces is that its concerns seem to be ignored. After what happened earlier in the year, Pakistan clearly tried to isolate India diplomatically. And whilst it managed to get the issue of Kashmir on the UN agenda, it quickly disappeared after that. And that is the problem that Pakistan faces.
It is, indeed. I mean, out of the international countries, I think Pakistan's strongest friend is China. with of course it has a lot going on there, sort of economically, and but the problem is that China is very aware that India is right next door, and it needs to keep a certain relationship with India as well. So China's own economy is not as strong as it could be. So that China's being very circumspect about what it does, and the thing is that Pakistan and India, both leaders, are facing their internal problems.
And the natural way to deal with those problems is to turn to the enemy, isn't it?
It is, because then you divert public attention. You divert the attention of your own countrymen. And in the case of India, it works really, really well. So with all that's been going on in India recently, with the
citizenship bill that's been taking, that has led to huge protests across the country.
And I think that was a surprise for the Modi government, actually, the backlash that's occurred. So anytime anything like that happens, the strategy that Modi takes is to raise the temperature with Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, of course, is no fool either, and Imran Khan is not had an easy time of it recently. He's got some internal domestic problems. So when anything like this happens, now he's sort of raising his game, and he's the foreign minister has said that, and look at the language again, that in his letter to the UN, he's going to talk about the aggressive and provocative design of India. And there is a fear in the Pakistani press that India plans to launch an attack on Pakistan to divert attention, as you say, Rahul, away from the whole human rights violations in Indian-held Kashmir, and the whole problem with what the Pakistanis call this anti-Muslim law in India.
Which Mr. Modi has said that is not the case. This is a law that applies not to Indian Muslims, but to people who live outside India, particularly in Pakistan, Afghanistan and Bangladesh, which is what the Act covers. Is one of the problems in the relationship between the two countries that the traditional country that would intervene and at times just bang heads together, the US under Donald Trump, not so keen to get involved, basically?
Exactly. And in fact, the US relationship with Pakistan is not as strong as it has been in the past. So, as you say, Pakistan is quite isolated at the moment. And also, people do, I think India knows its strength at the moment. As I said before, with Brexit and everything else going on, India has a strong economy compared to many other countries in the world. Many other countries in the world see India as a prized market. So they're very, they're very careful about
it's
what they're
an interesting
doing.
point, isn't it? You would know as well as I do that, and India senses that now, and not just the government. I think people in India sense the emergence of their country as I think often it's overstated by Indians themselves, but they get a sense of a country that is not yet a superpower, but is becoming more powerful.
Yes, and I think India has a kind of awareness of itself. It has an arrogance about itself. And with all the world's turmoil that's going on at the moment, it's riding quite high. So at the moment, it's getting away with what it's doing. And who's going to stand up to it? Who is there to stand up to it, do you think, Rahul?
It's an interesting question, I think, at the moment. I think India looks at a country that I think India is very concerned about in its sort of geographical area is China, and what the Chinese can do and may do. But I think you're right that when it comes to India's own strategies of dealing with issues, I think it feels increasingly confident that it can do what it wants to some extent, that it almost follows the Chinese line of diplomacy, which is, we're a big country, we have a huge market that everybody wants to come into. It's still a restricted market as well. So India can do a lot of bargaining when it comes to opening up sectors to different parts of the world. Do you still think that when we look at the world, and we look a lot at North Korea and South Korea, but the countries that are most likely to have a nuclear conflict are India and Pakistan still?
I'm not sure that they'll actually go for the nuclear option. But I certainly think that there will be continued aggression with Indian troops and the missile launchers moving up towards the border. And Pakistan saying, the Pakistan army chief saying that Pakistan will give a befitting response to Indian aggression. I think there's every reason to believe that there might be an exchange of fire anytime soon. I think everybody will be very hesitant to press the button.
What happened earlier this year was interesting because there was an Indian pilot who was shot down. And in a sense, that's what brought an end to what could have become a much bigger conflict because the Indians needed to get him back. Pakistan had, in a sense, a bargaining tool. If that hadn't have taken place, we could have seen a much bigger conflict between these two countries.
I do think that boils down to Imran Khan and his government, because I think it's a kind of Khan thing that he'll go for politeness and diplomacy where he can. So he gave the pilot, the captured Indian pilot, back to India. But if you look at other things he's doing, like with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge going to Pakistan, the first royals for a long time, Test cricket coming to Pakistan, international one-day cricket, and now rock stars and other people talking about wanting to come to Pakistan. This seems to be a kind of deliberate governmental move on the part of Pakistan to show people that the country is peace-loving, it's welcoming of tourists, and with, opening the doors to Sikh pilgrims just recently for a Sikh guru's anniversary. I think this is a deliberate move on the part of the Pakistani government to counter the image of, harboring terrorists and violence and all the rest of it that's been there in the country for years. So I think this is something that's coming from the government. So yes, in that way, the two leaders are slightly contrasting. Modi, very, very right-wing, very hawkish and bullish. And Khan, well, actually, he's not speaking from a position of strength anyway, but he's taking a kind of softer approach in many respects of saying, hey world, we're a friendly country, come and visit us. Your Duke and Duchess can come here, so can the rest of the world.
Rani, thank you very much. It's two countries I think we're going to talk a lot about in 2020, as we have done in 2019 as well. Rani Singh there giving us her thoughts on those relationships between two of the world's nuclear powers.